As the great Edwin Starr once said, war, huh, yeah, what is it good for? Well, it seems that most inventions in modern society have been progressed during times of war to kind of get the edge over their opponents. Now, out of everyone here, who can specifically identify what a German soldier would look like nowadays? Of course you would. Well, seeing by that hand raising is very small, this is the perfect informative speech for you, as the German uniform has progressed all the way from the 1700s to nowadays with certain traditions that have always been held up and continue to be held up nowadays. Now, we can't just look at pictures and just see that these are the example, because they aren't adequate enough. We have to look at original uniforms themselves and how they are built, what the material is, instead of these drawings done by someone back before. Now let's start with the common Hessian soldier before Germany was actually made a country. These were the same men who were assaulting the United States, hired by the British Empire in the 1770s. Thanks to the website army.mil, Colonel John C. Sammis can show us what an original Hessian uniform can look like. As you can see, they have these same halter caps like the Catholic priests you would see wear. Instead of it being made of cloth, it instead is being made of metal. Though these helmets didn't really have that much protection against oncoming shrapnel, it was more of a decorative sort of headdress. Now, these uniforms didn't really pave the way for the common traditions you see nowadays with the uniform, but they certainly did impact that cultural of military, how the culture is surrounded by its military and has most of its men go into the military. Now, as about 80 years later, the Prussian Empire formed, uniting Germany under one flag. And you can see that some of these common traditions are starting to unfold. Now, yes, these are black and white pictures, as these are original pictures, but you can sort of see these are the early progressions of the German uniform, as perceived now as the Prussian uniform. This is an original M1876 Waffenrock, which means field uniform or military uniform, and some of the key things that will forever remain into the sort of German uniform is the style of the shoulder boards and the cuff title right here, you can see barely, the blue one, and for a little bit, this back skirt button design. Now, since this is made entirely of blue and bright red, it is very easily to spot the guy wearing this uniform out to the battle. So once World War I broke out, the Germans, under the German Empire, did some modifications to this uniform. Here actually you can see some of the adequate drawings from field manuals from the Prussian Empire, but as World War I drew on, they had to make changes. The Piccolo helmet that they had to have a cloth cover, because it had giant shiny brass on top, and it would be an excellent target for any British soldiers seeing them on the trench line. Now this is an original M1907 German uniform, and as you can see, a lot of the traditional pieces of this uniform has moved over from the Prussian uniform onto the Imperial German field rock. You can see that the cuff buttons are still the same as before. It still has these sort of colorful brass buttons, and the back skirt is still maintaining the same design. But some of the obvious changes are the collar is now it has like an actual collar instead of just going up to the neck, and the shoulder boards are pointed. And the color is now known as field gray, which is going to forever impact the sort of German uniform design. This was deemed as a sort of camouflage instead of the bright blue Prussian blue that they had on the previous uniforms. Now, as the war progressed on, supplies started to shorten, and they had to revert to the M1915 uniform, which is where they had to replace certain buttons because of supply shortages, and just kind of revert the uniform back. And you can even see some of these taking place into World War II, which is the French cuffs and the bottle green collar, which I will be going on to now. As World War II progressed, the uniform designer was actually a modern company you all might know by the name of Hugo Boss. Yes, before they designed men's clothing and suits, they actually were made to design uniforms for the Nazi Party. So thanks to At the Front, a very accurate production of military uniforms, they actually, what they do is they take original uniforms, dissect them to make reproduction uniforms. This is the M36 model uniform, the first model made for the combat infantrymen. As you can see, they still have the bottle green collar from the World War I M1915 uniform, but there are more pockets, and the buttons now are a subdued gray color. But they still hold the cuff title and the Litzen that you could have seen in the officer's Prussian uniform. And then here's an original picture of a staff sergeant wearing the M36. Next on would be the M40 uniform. What they had to do was, since supply shortages came on, they had to sort of turn the bottle green collar into the same field gray color and the shoulder boards as well. This one is actually made by At the Front as well, and this would be one of the more common uniforms seen. In fact, this is an original POW at D-Day who was found wearing that uniform, and yes, he is Asian as well. Coincidence? Now moving on, the next thing to go was the pleats on the pockets right here. They are actually just removed and just straight pockets now on the M42. Now, according to the SS by Time Life magazine, the M42 uniform was actually supposed to be contracted to specifically the Waffen-SS. But as you can see in this picture right here, regular Wehrmacht soldiers were also issued these uniforms eventually. See that they don't have any of the pleats on their pockets, just the scalloped flaps. And of course, no SS runes on their uniforms. Moving on, the next thing to go was the scalloped pockets, pocket flaps, making the M43 model. Now, here's a picture. You can kind of see it back there. This man right here, he has the straight pockets, but you can kind of see that it didn't really, like, as the year went on, like, everyone got their uniforms taken away, and then they got that new model uniform. It was just, you got what you had. You can kind of see this very excellent sort of diversification in the uniform, but still the same traditional design for the Wehrmacht uniform. But once 1944 hit, according to Axis soldiers' uniforms, equipment, and weapons, the M44 was a complete redesign of the German uniform. They actually copied the British design of their field uniform, making the M44, which was introduced into August of 1944. This one here is made by another producer, but not at the front. As you can see, they had to revert the insignia a bit. Instead of making it outlining the eagle, it's just a straight triangle. And actually the collar is supposed to be made open on this. And the bottom skirt is just completely gone. And there's only 2 sets of buttons. And they're still straight and flaps on them. Now, once World War II ended, there was a diversification in Germany with a giant wall being built by the Russians. So, with this diversification in the country, there are 2 separate militaries in one country now. And as you can see, the uniform design will completely change itself. But tradition is always staying in place, you can see. This is the Eastern German uniform controlled by the Russians, and on the other side is a West German uniform right after the Second World War. As you can see, they still have the same certain German World War II design on them, but they've kind of upped it a bit since there is now dress uniform and combat uniform, unlike World War II where your dress and combat were the same thing. You can see the Litzen is still there, and the shoulder board design is still exact. And on the West German one, you can see that the bottle green collar has returned again, but it is now an open one, kind of like a suit. But combat uniform-wise, they were just completely different. The East German uniforms used a sort of raindrop pattern that would only exist into the Soviet East Germany, and they would have these, their helmets were being very weird and panned out, but the West Germans actually used a German camouflage used in World War II during the late war, and they would start implementing more US style gear like the M1 helmet you can see right there. Now on to the reunification of Germany from 1989 to the present day. The 2 armies finally merged together into what is now called the Bundeswehr, or the German Federal Military. As you can see, the tradition is still there. This guy is a staff sergeant, and he still holds the Litzen and The belt buckle is the same style as before. The only change now being is that for dress uniform they wear different berets for different sorts of units. And the field uniform now is completely changed up, but there are still some common traditions that you can see in there still. For one being that this one is actually an original one. You can see that the collar now is still in similar design to the button-up M40 uniform, and they still have a certain style-esque of the M43 pockets, and the shoulder boards are still very similar to the World War II uniform. The only difference being is that they are Velcro on and off. And a lot of the time, certain medals for these uniforms are actually sewn on as sort of a patch sort of thing. But according to Hessen Antique, this uniform is still going under major changes and will very soon be having a new sort of camouflage design or just sort of whole different design of sorts. So in conclusion, we can see that the German uniform is very, very, like, you can see the evolution of this uniform throughout the ages. And you can see that there are certain things that are always just staying in place, such as the cuff title and the Litzen design and sort of the shoulder board design. But, as stated before, I've been studying this since the first grade, and I can pretty much guarantee that this is about as good as it gets for uniform tradition. As you can see, the U.S. uniform design is always changing, and there isn't really anything that they sort of keep with their uniform. But for some reason, the Europeans always keep those traditional things in their dress uniforms, and that's just something very clever that I like to see.